it's 2 o'clock. I'll just get started by just saying that, just so everyone's aware, the webinar, what you're watching now, it will be recorded. So anything that you say will be saved and, perhaps used in the future when people watch the recording again. Over to you, Colette.
Okay, well, thank you to everybody for joining us today for part 2 of our discussion on ammonia and agriculture. If you didn't manage to catch Thursday's session, we sent you the link. It's on YouTube on the CSF site, and we'll be circulating the links for both webinars after this event. So my name is Colette Garner. I'm an air quality advisor on the National Catchment Sensitive Farming team. So I basically work as part of the national team to support local catchment sensitive farming officers in delivering ammonia advice on farm. So I help to deliver training and technical guidance and support. So just a couple of housekeeping rules. Just make sure your microphone is muted and camera is off. And if we could ask you to use the chat to ask presenters questions. So we've got quite a few slides. There's only 2 presenters today, but we'd like to maintain the flow of the presentation. So if we could ask you to use the chat facility, and then at the very end, we will open up the telephone lines just in case you want to ask a question and you haven't been able to ask it in the chat facility. So you can access the chat by going to the bottom half of your screen, and there's that little speech bubble that you click on, and then the chat will open up on the right-hand side of your screen. So a little bit about catchment sensitive farming. We're a successful partnership between DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and Natural England, and we work together with farmers and organisations in priority areas across England to improve the quality of water and air. And Eden Rivers Trust is one of our delivery partners in the Northwest. They're an environmental charity that's dedicated to improving and protecting the River Eden in Cumbria. And they work with a wide range of partners, including ourselves and other organisations, individuals and community groups, to deliver a sustainable, integrated approach to managing the River Eden and the surrounding land. So for those of you that weren't on the call on Thursday, the reason why we are running these 2 training events is to basically get consistent messaging out into the agricultural community. So like the CSFOs, as advisors, you're dealing with farmers on a daily basis. So we want everybody to be delivering the same message, and we want to enhance that capacity for delivering ammonia advice on farms and enable you to undertake SCAIL assessments to meet the requirements for planning applications. So on Thursday we discussed about the national position with regard to ammonia and why it's a problem, and the drivers for change. So we talked about the clean air strategy and planning requirements, and sources, impacts, solutions, and mitigation options, and financial initiatives that can be used to incentivise farmers to make these changes. So today what we're going to do is give you a bit of an overview of the planning system and how local planning authorities interpret planning law differently, in different ways, and then how we can use impact risk zones on MAGIC to assess if a farm's likely to require a SCAIL screening assessment. And we'll look at the information in APIS that underpins SCAIL, and how you can undertake a SCAIL screening assessment, and also how you can use it to model multiple sources and mitigation. And lastly, how the SCAIL results inform decision-making in planning applications. So I'll deliver this first part about planning and the impact risk zones and APIS and an introduction to SCAIL, and then my colleague, Catherine Kelsall, will deliver the practical session at the end. So what she's going to do is run through a live demonstration on the SCAIL application and show you a few of the functionalities and scenarios that you might come up against. And Catherine is the Air Quality Lead Advisor for the Northwest. So she covers Cumbria and Lancashire as well, and Cheshire. So the basic planning requirements in terms of air quality, Natural England is a statutory consultee on planning applications affecting designated sites. So the local planning authority, when they receive a planning application, they have to ensure that they take our advice and to make sure that there are no likely significant effects on designated sites when they are evaluating the planning applications and approving them. So basically, the planning authorities and Natural England both use the impact risk zones facility, and basically what that means is that any proposals that trigger an impact risk zone for potential air quality impacts on designated sites will require a SCAIL screening assessment at a minimum. And I say at a minimum because there are larger proposals that get submitted to planning for things such as energy recovery facilities that are automatically, because of their size, they would have undertaken a detailed modelling assessment, so they would have gone way past screening. But for most agricultural applications, the SCAIL screening assessment would be the first step. So the other thing is that if you are submitting multiple applications, so we have seen instances where there's been two separate applications for animal housing and another one for a slurry store submitted 1 week after another. And they need to be assessed together in SCAIL because obviously individually they may not have an impact, they may not exceed the screening threshold, but collectively they would. And if it gets to the point of the planning application having to consider them in combination, it could delay the approval process. Both SCAIL input and output files should be provided with the planning application, and that's so that we can validate the figures and ensure the information's been put in correctly. Any proposals received by Natural England without the screening assessment or a detailed air quality modelling will be returned to the planning authority, so it will just delay the planning process further. We encourage early discussion with the farmer and CSFO, if there is one, if you're in a high priority area, to discuss any opportunities and constraints and ensure that any mitigation is appropriate prior to submitting. And although CSF are not able to design mitigation, we can advise on suitable options. And we suggest that you use realistic figures. So you need to be representing in SCAIL as realistic a scenario as possible. And if you deviate at all from the standard figures in SCAIL, if you create a user-defined emission figure or you apply a non-standard mitigation that's not within SCAIL, and we'll discuss how you do that later on, then you need to describe any assumptions that you've made and where you've got your information from, again, so that we can validate it. But basically, animal housing needs to be assessed at full capacity. So if you have housing for 100 cows, but you're only putting 82 in it, it still needs to be assessed for 100 cows. Slurry lagoons should be assessed for a minimum of 6 months in high rainfall areas and 365 days if permanently housed. So just a few facts about planning. You will be aware that there's a difference between how Natural England and the Environment Agency assesses air quality. There's a few reasons for that. Basically, as I've said, Natural England is a statutory consultee for designated sites, whereas the Environment Agency is a statutory consultee for flooding and water quality, flooding and drainage, basically. So they are not consulted on air quality for all of the smaller planning proposals. It's only when an agricultural proposal gets to a certain size that the EA basically requires a permit to be issued. So that's 40,000 chickens, or 2,000 for pigs. It's 2,000 finishers over 730 kilos, or 750 sows. So the other one reason is that the EA, when they issue a permit, they have the opportunity to review and amend the requirements and the conditions, and they can undertake monitoring. Whereas when we're looking at planning applications, we only get a look at it at the point when the planning application is submitted, and then that's it, basically. So we use an assessment threshold of 4%. Now, that's just a screening threshold to indicate we need to look at it further. So it's not a fixed limit. What the EA does is it looks at 50% of the critical limit. If the proposal shows that the figures are over 50%, they will automatically request a detailed assessment. If it's less than 20%, then they won't require a detailed assessment. If it's between 20 and 50%, they will look at other permits that could act in combination within that area. The other difference is that EA will only be looking inside the permit boundary, and they won't be looking at background effects. They are purely looking at large permitted installations. Whereas Natural England, because we've got that legal remit to protect designated sites, we're looking at the broader perspective, and we are looking at background levels as well. So for those reasons, obtaining a permit does not guarantee planning permission, and vice versa. We have had situations where permits been issued and planning permission's been refused. The other thing is that obviously with the planning authority, they have to look at wider issues than just air quality. So they're looking at protected species and the human health aspect, if you like, the environmental health, as well as landscape. So they're looking at a much broader range of factors. However, Natural England is working with the EA to try to align our air quality assessment protocol. We're also working, CSF is working with Natural England, our colleagues in sustainable development, to ensure that we have a coordinated response to the planning authority. So basically, if CSF approves something in terms of improving water quality, we make sure that it's not going to cause a problem in terms of air quality. The other thing is that we're working with local planning authorities to try to introduce validation checklists for air quality and supplementary planning documents. And we'll show you in a minute that we have achieved this. One of my colleagues down in the southwest in Devon, they've recently issued a supplementary planning document for air quality, which is essentially to help applicants with information and advice on what the requirements are in terms of air quality. And up in Cumbria, we're planning on working with a couple of our local authorities. So it depends upon the available resources within the teams as to how soon that will happen. The other thing is that each local authority is working on a different timescale, so they issue their plans for the next 5 to 10 years, so they're all at a different stage of development. The Habitats Regulations assessment and any in-combination assessment for European sites should be undertaken by the local planning authority. So that's once they've received all of their statutory responses and response from us as well. Designated site protection and habitats regulation assessment, the process remains unchanged post-Brexit. The only thing that will change is who's responsible. So that responsibility for enforcement is going to shift from the EU to the UK, but the rules and regulations remain the same, and the level of protection. The air quality assessment basis in England is likely to become more restrictive. That's under review at the moment. So whereas at the moment we're looking at 4%, it is possible that we could move to 1% process contribution. So yes, there's a differential between all of the local planning authorities and how they interpret planning law, and each local planning authority has a local plan. They set out their strategic policies and they have strategic development site allocations. Their approach depends upon what their local pressures and priorities and resources are. So, for instance, if you're in a more urban area, you would expect to see more policies relating to nitrous oxide and traffic and human health. Or if you're in a more agricultural area, then you'll see more of a focus on agriculture. So all local plans contain a policy for conserving and enhancing biodiversity. So that includes designated sites, priority habitat and ancient woodland. But not all local plans will contain a policy specifically for air quality. So, as I said, the approach to the assessment of air quality impact as a consequence will vary. Just some examples. We've got Carlisle City Council. Their focus is on human health, and they have a number of designated air quality management areas which focus on addressing nitrous oxide from traffic. They don't have a specific policy for air pollution, but impacts from air pollution on designated sites would still need to be assessed as per their biodiversity policy. Another one of our local councils, Eden District Council, a bit more rural. They address all major developments requiring an impact assessment for air quality, but agriculture is not specifically mentioned. It's more to do with housing and industry. But their impacts on biodiversity would still need to be addressed, as per their biodiversity policy. So it's a bit better than Carlisle, but not as good as North Devon and Torridge District Council local plan. So back at the end of last year, they adopted a supplementary planning document, and in it they've considered the potential for new developments to affect air quality and what type and scale of planning applications would require an impact assessment and what it would include. And they've added additional detail to relevant policies in the plan to help applicants interpret and respond to the requirements. Section 7 is specifically on agricultural development, so that's been fully addressed now. And there's a link there if you want to have a read of it. So this is what we are encouraging with other planning authorities, but as I said, it depends upon local team resources as to how fast that happens. And we talked on Thursday about the high priority delivery areas, and I know this is important in regards to getting funding under countryside stewardship. So I just thought I'd show you. This is North Cumbria, so we've got a couple of the planning authorities. I think the writing slightly shifted, but the one at the very top is Carlisle, and then we've got Allerdale just in the northwest corner running down the coast, and the Lake District in the middle, and this is Eden, the big red strip that's going down the right-hand side, down here. So, as you can see, most of Cumbria is a high priority area, so the red areas are the high priority delivery areas, so, funding would be available in those areas. And you can see from this map on the right, these are all the SACs and the triple SIs. So SACs are the special areas of conservation, the European sites, and triple SIs in North Cumbria. So you can see there's quite a lot of them. And if I were to overlay this with the impact risk zones, I think, as Susan suggested on Thursday, the whole of Cumbria would probably be covered by them. So it would be hard to put in any sort of application without impacting on one of them in terms of air quality. Net gain is something new that's coming into planning, and you may be wondering why I'm referring to it in terms of air quality, but there is a slight conflict in terms of mitigation. So, for instance, if for mitigation for air quality, for ammonia, you were putting in a tree shelter belt, it can't count towards biodiversity net gain. The net gain needs to be additional to any existing mitigation required or any agri-environment scheme options, so it's separate. It's already included in principle in the planning policy framework, and it will become mandatory in 2023, and the threshold is 10%, so they'll be expecting 10%. With some exceptions. It's in some local plans already. As I've said, they are all at a different stage of development, the local plans, so some will have implemented it already, but the rest will have to do it by 2023. The planning authority determines the net gain requirement, and how they do that is they use a biodiversity metric tool. And that's under development, and it should be available soon. And planning applicants would need to submit, once this becomes mandatory, or if it's already in your local plan and they require it, you'll need to submit biodiversity metric calculations and a net gain plan with your application to the planning authority. And it sounds like a bit of a headache, another hoop to jump through with your planning application, but on the plus side, there is opportunity for farmers and landowners to use their own land for biodiversity net gain, to offset for other proposals elsewhere. So I think the idea is there's going to be a register where farmers declare, what land they have available for net gain that can be used in other applications. So watch this space, really. That's under review at the moment. It's not been finalised yet. So on to impact risk zones. So what are impact risk zones? So they're available in Magic, and you can actually import them, get the layer to import into your own GIS facility. It's a GIS tool for rapid assessment of risk to designated sites, and it doesn't just assess air quality. There are a whole bunch of categories. Water quality is another one, and species. Housing proposals, housing development, and mining. There's a whole row of categories, basically. So how you access it? Well, once you're in Magic, it's available publicly. You just select the SSI Impact Risk Zones layer, and they'll become apparent. So European sites are underpinned by the SSI designation, and their interest features and sensitivities are covered by the SSI Impact Risk Zones. So basically all of the protected site features are covered. And they're defined by size. So each impact risk zone has a facility size or a lagoon size. So now we're talking about agricultural installations. The distance, so how far the source is away from the designated site, and how far it's likely to travel, the pollution, and the sensitivity of designated site habitats to air pollution. So basically they're set by those three criteria. So this is a print screen. This is from Magic. So here, these purple lines you can see, these are the impact risk zones around the designated sites, which are hatched in green. So this is just an example. So we've clicked on the little town here of Morehouse. If you click on the information button on the bar at the top, and then click on your proposal, it will come up with the site check results. Now, it only shows a summary, so it's not going to tell you all of the designated sites that are affected individually. It just tells you that, under air pollution, any development that could cause air pollution, including livestock and poultry units, slurry lagoons, manure stores. So if you see that message under air pollution, that's just an indication that you need to run a SCAIL screening assessment, because there is likely to be an impact on a designated site. So on to APIS, Air Pollution Information System. So what is APIS? Well, it's a comprehensive database of information on air pollution and the effects on habitats and species. And it was developed in partnership with the regulatory agencies and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. And it acts as a support tool for anybody in the conservation and regulatory agencies for assessing the potential effects of air pollutants on habitats and species. And the idea was to enable a consistent approach to air pollution assessment across the UK. So it's used in assessing the impacts of permit applications and planning applications, basically. Useful information on APIS. There is a lot of information on APIS, but these are the items that we focus on mainly when we're doing a detailed assessment of air quality impacts on a designated site. We look at, critical levels and loads of nitrous oxide and ammonia. We look at the existing background concentrations and depositions of, nitrogen and ammonia. Are the trends going up or down? Is there a long-term increase or is it going down? So, you're trying to assess the likely impact of your proposal in context with what's going on the designated site. And you can also look at nitrogen source attribution. So you can look at that by region and by industry, and it looks at short range and long range sources, including from Europe. And it not only contains information by designated site, so it records the information for each of the designated habitats within each designated site, but you can also put in a grid reference and a habitat type, and it will give you the same information. And that's a useful facility for any non-designated sites, such as ancient woodland or local wildlife sites, or a newly designated site that's not yet been put onto APIS. So the other thing, when we're looking at SCAIL, is critical levels and critical loads. And the critical level is the amount of ammonia that is in the air, and the critical load is defined as the amount of nitrogen that is deposited onto a site. And those levels are set according to where they think the impact is going to be. So, for instance, with sensitive species such as lichens and bryophytes, for ammonia we have a critical level of 1 microgram per cubic metre, whereas for ordinary terrestrial vegetation it's 3 micrograms, because they're not as sensitive to aerial pollution because they have roots. So beyond those figures, those critical levels and loads, you could expect to see adverse effects. So I've just had a look at a particular site. I've looked at Oulton Moss, SSI in Cumbria, and these are just a few examples of the information that you can see for this site. So this is showing the critical levels and loads for Oulton Moss, and it shows them for each habitat. So you can see this is bogs, this habitat that's highlighted, and the relevant critical load is 5 to 10 kilograms of nitrogen per year per hectare. And if you click on the little plus sign, that's the other habitat that's designated for this site, and it'll give you similar information. And it tells you if it's sensitive to nitrogen or not. You can look at existing background concentrations and depositions. So this again is for Oulton moss, but you can also enter a specific grid reference, as I just suggested earlier, and it will give you the same information. So concentrations and depositions. So again, for the bog habitat, you can see the existing background levels for nitrogen and ammonia. So it gives you a minimum and a maximum reading and an average. And this one is just a graphic view of nitrogen deposition. And so again, we've got the same two habitats. So here we've got the minimum and the maximum critical loads, as expressed here, 5 to 10 kilograms per hectare per year. And then this little dot is the actual reading. So you can see for both of these habitats, it's outside of the recommended range. So there's likely to be an impact from any excess nitrogen from a proposal. You can also look at trends. Are they going up or down? It shows you a figure for a deposition to woodland. So obviously that's a tall ecosystem, or we've got short vegetation. So, you know, the air is likely to flow over the shorter vegetation, and the forest has got a much bigger surface area for absorption. So you would expect, you know, the nitrogen deposition to be higher for woodland. But you can see with both of these vegetation types, it is actually declining, the nitrogen deposition. So it's starting to decline slightly, which is good news. You can also look at source attribution. You know, where is the nitrogen coming from on your designated site? So this particular pie chart, it shows the contributions by region. So you can see Scotland, England, and Northern Ireland, and Europe, and it's showing you, you know, where the pollution's coming from. So, you know, we've got 5% from fertiliser in England, and we've got 56% from livestock in England. So that can be useful in indicating if you should be giving advice or not. I mean, for instance, if it was 56% coming from Northern Ireland or Scotland, there's very little you can do locally. It's, you know, it would be less of a priority. So with SCAIL, it stands for Simple Calculation of Atmospheric Impact Limits, and it's a free online screening tool that was developed by the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. Its use is supported by statutory bodies for doing air quality screening assessments, so it's acceptable for permitting and planning. And it basically calculates the amount of ammonia and nitrogen reaching designated sites within a given range. And depending on, you know, what your distance, your screening distance is, so if you put in 10 kilometres, it will pick up all of the designated sites within that 10-kilometre radius of your grid reference. And it will calculate the impacts on all of them, basically, from your source. So SCAIL uses the designated site and feature data that I've just talked about that's held in APIS, and it will assign the most sensitive habitat for assessment, so it's the most precautionary assessment. And it will indicate if more detailed assessment is required. There is a user guide and online tutorial available. One question we do get asked about is, where does the background data come from in SCAIL? So, like I said, it's feeding off the database that's held in APIS, and it's updated every year based upon a 3-year average. And it uses the latest measurements from networks around the UK. So for ammonia, this is provided by the National Ammonia Monitoring Network, and it consists of 85 physical sites across the UK that are monitoring ammonia background levels, and it's managed by the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology with support from DEFRA. And they use a model to redistribute that information, the information from all agricultural census data as ammonia emissions, using land cover maps, so the land use maps basically, to provide a statistical representation of likely emission distributions around those sources. The data was last updated in March last year, so it now contains background data up till 2018. So some useful fields on SCAIL. The conservative MET mode is important. It assumes that the designated site is always downwind from the proposal. You can run it in realistic scenario for comparison, but in terms of submitting the screening for a permit application or a planning application, it must be run in conservative MET mode. The source so basically if you input several sources, and you can input up to 10 separate sources, it will accumulate the results. But the figures will show separately at the bottom of the output file in column R. And this will all become a bit clearer when Catherine runs through a few of the scenarios. User-defined emissions. So you can use the user-defined emission field for either livestock that's not included in here. So for instance, we've got beef and dairy cattle and chickens and pigs in here. But for instance, if you are trying to do an application for goats or turkeys, obviously that's a non-standard emission factor. So you would have to use the user-defined emission field. And Catherine will explain that in a couple of minutes as well. You can also use it for applying non-standard mitigation. So there's a range of mitigation measures that are preset into SCAIL, but then there are some that aren't. So for instance, increasing the scraping frequency in your cattle shed. It does reduce emissions, and we have a figure for it, but it's not already predefined in SCAIL, so you would have to calculate that and put it in. And then once you input that user-defined emission figure and press calculate, it will calculate the impact on the designated sites. The option of new or existing source, if you select new, it assumes that the source that you're calculating is not already included in the background data to 2018. So I will hand you over to Catherine now, and she's going to give you, hopefully, technology permitting, a live demonstration.
Yep, fingers crossed.
Hang on. Hang on, I've lost the participant list.
No, that's okay. I think I'm host now.
Excellent.
Thank you, Colette. So I'm Catherine Carlisle. I'm the Air Quality CSFO and Catchment Sensitive Farming Officer for the North West, as Colette mentioned. So I cover from Cheshire through to Cumbria. My role is providing training, support and advice, both internally and externally, on reducing ammonia emissions from agriculture. I've pulled together 4 examples to go through in SCAIL. Hopefully they'll cover a range of scenarios. I have just picked a field in Cumbria for the location. It is literally just a point that I picked out for no reason whatsoever. It's just a location. So example 1 is a single source, so just a slurry store. But what I have done is I've included putting in a user specified site. So this is, as Colette mentioned before, not all designated sites or project habitats are included within SCAIL if it's not an APIS. So say a site's been designated recently, that information's not on APIS, so it won't pull through to SCAIL. So it's just an example of how to add in a user-specified site. In that example, I'll also show how to save the input data, so you don't have to keep re-inputting data if you want to go back and edit or rerun SCAIL. Example 2 is a single source, so the Slurry store again. We'll load the input data that we saved and change the source to include a cover, so some mitigation that's already built into SCAIL. Example 3 will be multiple sources, so we'll add the original Slurry store and we'll add some housing. With our example, we'll also go through how to create an output file, and I'll show you where it splits out the process contribution for each source. And the last example is multiple sources. So again, the Slurry store and housing, but within the housing, we want to include some mitigation, but it's mitigation that's not built into SCAIL already. So we'll have to manually put in a defined emission for that mitigation. But it'll all come clear, hopefully, as we go through the examples. So hopefully I shall be able to share my desktop. Let me just... So if I just check, can you see SCAIL?
We can.
Get that, good. So when you're in SCAIL, it's, as Colette mentioned, it's a screen tool for assessing the impacts of agricultural sources of ammonia. And to do that, you need to fill in an online form. So this is the form that you need to fill in. Nice and simple. So throughout the form, there are little question mark icons. If you click on those, they're useful for giving you further information on what you need to put into the box. There's also, as Colette mentioned, the user guidance, which we found at the top. So example 1, running the conservative met. England, it's one farm, so we'll call it a farm. The location, like I mentioned previously, just doesn't relate to any farm. It's just a location. So this is the important bit. So you've got your location. It's the source data. So this is the information relating to the new source of emissions. So in this case, we were looking at a Slurry store, for example 1. So it's Catchment, and it's new. It's a new Slurry store. Location is pretty simple. It's the same location. Source type. There's a section there. It could be housing, land spreading, grazing, outdoor yards. But in this case, we're looking at litter and manure storage. Type, again, there's a selection. So for us, it's Slurry storage. And it's a tank uncovered. So there's no fresh manure. There's no tons of fresh manure. What we're looking at is the area of storage. So for Slurry stores, it's about the area because that's where the ammonia is lost from. The wind goes across. So in this particular example, we're using 1,200 metres squared and 180 days. The store will have Slurry in. So once you've put in your information as accurately as possible, if you've had to make any assumptions, make a note of them. If you're submitting this as part of the plan application, that's really useful information. Click Get Emissions Value, and what that does is it calculates the kilograms of ammonia at source. So for this one, it's 907 kilograms of ammonia at that location from that slurry storage. So then we move on to designated sites. As mentioned previously, we need to do a search radius of 10 kilometres because we expect European sites to be assessed up to 10 kilometres. Luckily, SCAIL defaults to 10 kilometres. So we run the receptor search, and this pulls through information from APIS on the designated sites. It'll take a little while because it's quite a list, yeah. So these are all the designated sites within 10 kilometres of this proposal. Now, as I mentioned previously, we're aware there's a sensitive bog quite close, and we want to make sure we assess that. So we're able to put in a user-specified site. I mean, this could be a local wildlife site you need to look at, or some other priority habitat. So just a designated site that's not yet on APIS. This example, we're going to add site. We'll just call it bog. And we'll pop in a location. And the drop-down menu just lets you choose a broad habitat type. So in this case, we're going to go with bog. But as you can see, there's a whole list. And that's it for the input in this case. So we put source information in, we pulled through the designated sites information, and we put some bespoke information around user-specified sites. What you can do then is you can save the data that you've inputted, so you don't have to keep re-inputting it. You may want to go back and edit it, or just rerun SCAIL. So simply by clicking Save Input Data, you can save as, and obviously I've done a few examples, and it's and save. Next step is to calculate, and this will take us through to the results. The input file that you created is we advise that you submit that to the local authority. That's a document that you should submit. It helps with consultees when they're assessing the screening assessment. It helps them to understand what's been input. So definitely make sure that you submit that if you're submitting a plan application. It can take just a little while. There's quite a few designated sites. So this is the results page. Site information. So within there is what comes first is the user-defined site, so the bog that we added, and then the designated sites by the closest to the proposal first. And you need to look through each of these and look at the process contribution. So we'll just look at bog for now. So you've got your distance from the installation. And this first box shows the nitrogen tonnes per annum at source. So where we've got 970 kilos, this is the 9.91 tonnes, so that's the equivalent. And the important things to look at are the process contribution. So the process contribution at receptor edge. So this is the emissions that at the edge of the designated site. The second thing you need to look at is the critical loader level and make a decision. So with this site, it's a bog, it's got mosses, we know it's sensitive, so it would be part of the lower plant, so it would have a critical level of 1. SCAIL has pulled through the critical load from APIS, that's 5 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. And you can see it's based that on bogs, so that's good. If you're not sure about the critical level, whether it's a 1 or 3, you can go to APIS. But this being a user-defined site, you can still get the information from APIS, but you probably need to go into the Habitat and Pollutants tab And from there, you're able to search by habitat and pollutant, and it'll give you a whole raft of information and advice on how it should be treated. So we use a 4% screening threshold for the process contribution. So the percentage of relevant standard process contribution is the process contribution as a percentage of the critical level load. So in this case, we've got process contribution for ammonia of 10% and nitrogen deposition of 11%. So it's over the 4%. So this is just a trigger where further consideration is needed. Mitigation needs to be implemented. We need to gather site-specific information around the designated site. So that's what the 4% is used for. This information then should be submitted to the local planning authority if it's part of a planning application. So I'll move on to example 2. So clear the form. Example 2 was for the Slurry store. We were going to upload the input data and change the source so it was used in the built-in mitigation of a floating cover. So if we click on load input data in the top right corner, it allows you to browse through files. And this is where I saved the Slurry store uncovered input file. We can submit that. And that inputs all the information that was in there previously from that earlier run of SCAIL. Apart from the number of storage days, which is a little bit strange, but pop that in. And all we need to do in this case is update the tank uncovered to tank with floating cover, get emissions value, and as you can see that's updated the source emissions at site, so let's change it to 367. All the information around the designated sites is still in there, the user specified site, so you can save that input data again. We'll just calculate, and we should be able to see the updated results. Any second. I'm sure it's still thinking about it. Yeah, there we go. So again, it's got the same setup. All it's done is updated the source emissions are now the 0.37, and the process contribution has been reduced, and so is the nitrogen deposition. So we can see the percentage of relevant process contribution has been reduced down to 4% for ammonia and 4% for nitrogen deposition. So it's just good for comparing different mitigation types, just to get a feel of what the benefits are from the type of mitigation, how much it's going to be reduced by. So it's a handy tool. Back to quickly run through example 3, which was the Slurry store with the floating cover and some additional housing, so there's multiple sources. So again, you can upload the input data. So if we just save this as an input file, you would just bring this back and then add an additional source. So in the source details, there is the option, you click there to add source. So there's just a warning that the SCAIL agriculture are not suitable for modelling sites with multiple installations or multiple dispersed sources. So the sources have got to be relatively close together. It's not able, because it just assumes all emissions head towards the site. If they're too dispersed, the model is not able to do it. It's too complicated. So the source emissions have got to be relatively close to each other. The sources of emissions even have got to be relatively close to each other. And again, it's just a matter of filling in the source details for the new source that you want to add. So in this case, it's housing. Just keep the location the same. Source type, housing in this case. Dairy cows, cubicle housing, 100. So it's just the number of livestock, your housing floor area, and the number of days that they're going to be in the housing. So I've just kept it 180 days to keep it simple, so I remember from the previous example. This one is naturally ventilated and it's 8 metres tall. So no different than when you put your original source details in. Just click on emissions, and this is the source emissions for this particular source, it's the 1278, and you've also got a running total of all the emissions sources, so that's the emissions from the Slurry store and this housing. So again, all that information's been saved. Calculate. The result page doesn't split out the process contribution from each source. It just gives you a total. To see the emissions from each source at the designated site, you'd need to create an output file, which I'll show you how to do once the results updated. Seems to be getting a bit slow. Yep, so there we go. So now we're showing that we've got two sources, and two new sources, and that's the total emissions at source. The process contribution is for both sources. And again, we're looking at the percentage of relevant standard process contribution. So it's shot up now to 17% and 18%. So if you want to see another file that needs submitting to the local authority, as well as being useful for looking at the individual process contributions, is an output file. So to create that output file, you just click on Save Results. Again, you're able to save it onto your desktop. If we open that, all the information that's contained within the results you see on screen are within this file. So this is the output file that it creates, an Excel spreadsheet, and there's a list of designated sites.
We can't see the Excel spreadsheet.
Oh wait, let me just. I'll have to stop sharing and then reshare. Thank you. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Yep, good. So when you first go into it, there's a list of designated sites. So those are all the sites that have been pulled through from APIS, as well as the bog that we've put in and the location. Information around the process contribution at each designated site, for each source, so nitrogen deposition, PM10, particulate matters, and ammonia. So that's by receptor site, so each designated site. Then there's a table which is the same information. By designated site, you've got your process contribution, background levels, your predicted environmental contribution, which is your background level plus your process contribution, and the critical level. Got the same for nitrogen deposition. And a lot of information in this, the output file. It's just a matter of digging through it, trying to find the information that's useful. And so again, you've got the process contribution for your nitrogen deposition by designated site, background levels, your predicted environmental contribution, so the total, and the critical load, which has been pulled through from APIS. So that's handy. And right at the bottom should be, so here we can see both of our sources, and in column R, that's the emissions at source for each source. So above is the process contribution by designated site, and this is the emissions at source for each source. So it's a handy document, like I say, definitely submit it with any planning applications. That's it. So let's go back to SCAIL. So we've now got a storage store, some housing. The process contribution is still 17-18%, so we might think about some additional mitigation. So in this case, we're thinking we'll increase scraping. So again, we're able to rerun this information back through SCAIL and add in the scraping. Now, scraping is not a built-in mitigation within SCAIL, so it'll be a bespoke emissions factor. So how we do that is we go to the source that we want to update source, in which case it's the housing, and we want to import a user-defined emissions. So we change that to user-defined emissions. So it's still new, it's still housing, still at the same location. It's housing, 4 area, 5. So the emissions from the previous run SCAIL for the housing at source was 1278 kilos. Now, we're using 20%. We're saying there's going to be a 20% reduction in emissions from increasing scraping. So it's just as simple as you take the original emissions, the 1278, times by 80%, and it gives you your new emissions. So you would update the 1278 with the new emissions at source. Figure. Else has changed, so we can get emissions, and that's updated that source emissions, and the process is the same again. So you can save the input data, so you don't have to rerun it. So you've got an audit trail of everything that you've been through. It's helpful for that. Calculate, and it'll just update the results. Again, you would create an output file, and if this was the version that you were putting the planning application for, you would submit that output file as part of your document. Just make sure that you apply the mitigation factor to the pollution source figure, not to the figure at the designated site. So when that updates, hopefully what will show is that it's pulled through those new figures. Now, as Colette mentioned previously, you can use that same process for user-defined emissions for animals that are not included within SCAIL. So say you've got turkeys, where I put in the original emissions at source, times it by the emission factor. There you would put in your number of birds times the emission factor that you've got for them. And the total would be the figure that you would put at your source emissions. So, yeah, so you can see it's pulled through, it's got a low figure, process contribution has been reduced, and we've got a new potentially relevant standard process contribution. So it's just a tool for helping with looking at mitigation, seeing what the effects are of the mitigation that you're putting in. Really handy for, like I say, submitting to the local planning authority. If you do decide to use it for emission factors for animals that are not included within SCAIL, just make sure that you're using the right emissions factor. So it needs to be ammonia, kilograms of ammonia per animal per year. So ammonia can be expressed in two ways, and there's different. Just make sure I'm telling you right. So it can be expressed differently. So there's different chemical forms of ammonia. So NH3N uses the molecular weight of only the nitrogen atoms, and whereas NH3 uses a molecular weight of the entire ammonia molecule. So that's one nitrogen and three hydrogen atoms. So it's just a matter of making sure that you're using the NH3, the ammonia emissions factor. There is more information on that in the presentation. I've included slides within the presentation, so you don't need to remember that. So I think that's all of the online sharing. So can you see the presentation again now? Is that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So like I say, I've put this information into the presentation, so it's all there so you can have a go, work through. You can use this case study if you like. Yeah, so interpreting the results. As I mentioned previously, for the output of each designated site within 5 kilometres for SSIs and 10 kilometres for European sites, then we need to look at the process contribution. And our starting point is the process contribution equal to or greater than 4%. This is both ammonia and for nitrogen deposition. It's not an absolute figure, it's a starting point, and it's used to determine if more detailed assessment is required. Natural England's conclusions are determined on a case-by-case basis using the best available information, and therefore a small process contribution exceedance may be allowable. If figures are very high, it's always worth going back and checking your input details to make sure they're realistic. It's easy to just put an extra zero on the number of chickens and your process contribution will shoot through the roof. So, yeah, definitely make that your first point of call. If it's still high, it's good to discuss mitigation requirements and options with the applicant and remodel and scale as required, like we did. Add some mitigation, see what the reduction in emissions are. Information about farming practices that have been changed since 2018. It's good to include that information with any plan application and to consider it because, as Colette mentioned, the background information within APIS, which is pulled through SCAIL, is based on data for the last 3 years up to 2018. So if there's any improvements in farming practices, say you've a cover on a florist store already, or you're now using a trailing hose for spreading, if you've done that after 2018, those benefits won't be in the background. So it's worth just looking at what's happened since 2018 if a review of the screening assessment, so you've done your screening assessment, but you want Natural England to look at it prior to submitting a planning application, this would be chargeable under DAS. Because Colette mentioned previously, the DAS advice doesn't guarantee planning approval because the local authority have a wider remit they need to consider, landscape, all of the other stuff. If Natural England deems exceedance is not acceptable, detailed modelling may be requested, so this is where you use ADMS or another detailed model. So is it back to you now, Colette?
Thank you, Catherine.
Hello. Wait, just try and make you host.
Okay. So in summary, what we've talked about in both of these webinars, the loss of ammonia represents a financial loss to the farmer. So what we need to try to do, and this is regardless of planning applications, is work with the farmer to keep the nitrogen on the farm. Because it benefits the farmer, it benefits the environment and also human health. And we need to look at the whole system right through from feeding the animals, through housing, storage and spreading to make sure that that nitrogen is captured and retained at every step. So, there's no good in looking after the nitrogen until you get to spreading and then applying it with a splash plate and, volatilizing all the ammonia. So looking at the whole system, and it will benefit everybody basically. And regardless of whether you're submitting a planning application or not, it's essential that we work with farmers to try to get these measures implemented sooner rather than later, get farmers to start thinking about putting a cover on their slurry store, changing how they're spreading, looking at nutrient management planning. Because whether we like it or not, change is coming under the Clean Air strategy. And we need to get farmers to plan ahead and make the best use of the financial incentives that are going to be available under the Agricultural Transition Plan. And, if you've got any questions or any doubts or want some information on suitable mitigation options, feel free to talk to your local CSFO. And, if you click on that link, it'll tell you who your local CSFO is, if you're not sure. And just one other thing, when you're using the emission reduction, the mitigation figures, if you use the figures in the more recent document that's dated 2019, I noticed there's a difference with the scraping the housing. It was up to 20% in the 2011 document, and then it's been refined further in the 2019 document. So look at that document first, the most recent one, and use those figures. If there isn't a figure, then go back to the other document, which has got a lot more options and more details. So now what we'd like to do is open up to questions. I don't know if there are any on chat, but if you want to ask one, I think there were people that couldn't use the chat facility on Thursday. So if you want to speak, then you can unmute yourself by pressing *6 on your phone or by just clicking on the little microphone next to your name in the participant list.
Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes.
It's Jump into here. I wanted to ask a question, probably not surprisingly, about free range eggs and in particular systems that you would plug into into SCAIL rather, where you've got an aviary system. Now, that will have drawn on what an aviary system is, and one of the challenges I have at the moment is to actually establish whether there's things going on in that house that would constitute additional measures for reducing emission factors, but I don't know what actually is regarded as a standard aviary system and what it actually entails. So therefore, I don't know whether the things going on could actually be counted as additional emission reductions. Is there any way of finding out what a standard aviary system contains when it was put into the model?
Well, I did look into the documents that are attached to SCAIL. So there's a SCAIL report, which includes some assumptions, what the modelling is based on, but it doesn't go into that much detail. So it would be a matter of contacting CEH about what's gone into SCAIL. That's something we're looking into anyway.
The reason I ask is that aviary systems are really just a physical feature. That's how the infrastructure inside the shed is. But then superimposed on that is whether we've got some heating in, and there's lots of sort of improvements that you can have for physical and managerially. And my question then, of course, the next question following on from that is, what kind of percentage do I then attribute to the fact that, for instance, low leak drinking mechanisms might not be in the original factor for an aviary system, but it actually might be significant because you're keeping everything drier, and therefore what's the reduction percentage that I can attribute to that?
Yeah, so regards to percentage of reduction from emissions, so the first protocol would be the DEFRA mitigation methods use guidance. Like I mentioned, there's it's updated in 2019, so the inventory of ammonia emissions. So that would be a starting point. If it's not mentioned within those documents, then...
So the DEFRA emission guidance document?
Yeah, it's in the presentation, so when it gets circulated, there'll be links to those. There'll also be a document called the Useful Information for Consultants Assessing Ammonia Impacts from Agricultural Sources. So there'll be lots of useful information there. So that would be the starting point, is going to what's already available. If it's something really bespoke for your poultry unit, so I don't think water drip feeders will be, but if there was something else, it may be that the manufacturer has got information on how it reduces emissions. Maybe that could be the source of information. But the first protocol would be the documents that are linked in the guidance we're going to circulate and in the presentation.
Okay, right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, there's a question from Sam Bate applying for a new shed for dairy cows on cubicles. Is there a formula that will factor in my existing housing? So the current housing accommodates 180 cows, and the new one will allow for 200 cows. So basically what we would suggest you do is you run your existing scenario for the 180 cows, and then run a separate scale calculation for the 200 on the new system. So you're basically presenting a before and after. The other thing you need to consider with that new housing is the flooring. You know, is there any extra mitigation that's going to be built into it? Do you have anything to add to that, Catherine?
No. Just any increase in animals, just making sure you've got the slurry capacity, the slurry storage capacity. So good practice in housing doesn't get lost through inappropriate spreading. So maybe some 20 calves, but worth noting.
But I think probably what's going to happen is the new housing is going to be more efficient, at managing the slurry, and that needs to be reflected in, applying mitigation. So, for instance, if you've got robotic scrapers and it's scraping 4 times a day, then you can already apply that, the mitigation that we were talking about with the increasing the scraping frequency with the new building. So, although you've got more cows, if you've got, more mitigation already built into that system, then obviously it's going to have a lower impact, if you like. So it's trying to reflect the, realistic situation. Are there any other questions on chat, Jamie? Oh, I've just seen another one.
There's just a query about when I input the second lagoon number, the total emissions went up. I think this is just what SCAIL does. If I'd have started from scratch, it would have updated with the new emissions, but because I just went back and I changed things, it looks like it adds it accumulates totals, but it doesn't. When you go to the results page, it does just bring through the relevant emissions. So the results page will have been right, and the source emissions will have been right. It will have just been the total emissions. It will have included the old version and the new. But yeah. And
there is another question from Sam Bate saying that if part of the building is split with a loose housed yard, is this entered as a separate building? We have had situations where we've got multi-purpose buildings. We had one recently that had dairy cubicles and the dairy parlour in one part and straw-bedded calves in another. So again, it's about representing a realistic scenario. So for instance, you'd put in the calves as one source with the relevant surface area, and then you'd put the cubicle cows in as another source. So you're just entering them as separate sources, basically. And again, the loose-housed yard, it's finding the closest approximation to it in SCAIL. So there are facilities to enter a yard in there in SCAIL. So you could have a yard, you could have your straw-bedded calves, and you could have your dairy, your cubicle dairy herd in another. But it's just putting in the correct, parameters, the right surface area, and the right numbers to get those out as separate sources.
So there was a question around if a new store replaces an existing but smaller store, is the SCAIL calculation based on the net additional storage capacity, or is the new store taken in isolation as a standalone installation? I think that's covered with the previous one, where you do it before and after.
Yeah, it's the background levels that are affected rather than the process contribution. Whether you choose existing or new source, it's affecting the background levels. And we haven't talked much about background levels today, and the reason for that is, as we discussed on Thursday, the background levels are so high in some areas. If we can't expect you to try and manage those, the only way you can manage them is by advising farmers on how to reduce their ammonia emissions. And at the end of the day, if they are doing everything they can to mitigate their emissions when they submit their planning application, that'll all be taken into consideration, and provided it's not so close to a designated site that those emissions can't be mitigated, then we should be able to hopefully approve the planning application. But it's something, the background levels are being taken up on a national level with the Slurry investment scheme, the research that's going on there with the location of slurry stores and the size of them, and also under the Nitrogen Futures project. We anticipate that the national measures that are being implemented with regard to, slurry spreading, banning the splash plate and moving to low emission spreading, covering slurry stores, those would be sufficient to, get at a given uptake level, those would be sufficient to bring the emissions down nationally. And it might still be that there are problem areas where we've got particular sensitive designated sites that are in close proximity to farmland, such as areas in the northwest of Cumbria. We've got a lot of bog sites up there. It's quite an open landscape and there's a lot of agriculture around there. So, it's an area of concern. So we may have to, do some local targeting with CSF advice and initiatives. So what I would say is don't worry about the background levels. Look at the process contribution and providing as much information as possible if you're submitting a planning application in terms of what they're already doing on the farm, particularly what they've done since 2018 that's not included in the background levels. And lastly, don't obsess about the 4%. It's not an absolute figure. It's just a trigger for us to, in Natural England, to undertake a more detailed assessment. And when we do that, we're looking at the site condition, the location of sensitive features on the site in relation to the proposal. So, it might well be that the sensitive features are on the far side of the proposal, and they're not likely to be affected anyway. So that's the sort of information that we look at, as well as, all of the measures that are being undertaken on the farm. I think, Catherine, Michael Graham had a query. Yeah. Can you see that one?
Yeah, so Magnum's asked, can the scenario from SAM-8 not be integrated in SCAIL? Yeah, is it this question? Into an existing a new setup. So I think when you put an existing source in, something that's already included in the background, I know it takes it out of the background, but
so it's what I've just said, really. Don't obsess about the background. We're more interested in what the emissions are from your proposed installation.
Yeah, just what I'm not sure about is whether it shows you the process contribution from an existing source. So it takes it out of the background. But if you wanted to compare your two process contributions, I'd have to check that to see how that works. Yeah, but I think that's all of the questions in chat covered.
Okay. Are there any more questions?
I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Right. I'll say, Bruce, I am struggling to get onto chat, so I've done it verbally or audibly. Basically, we have quite a few people. I'm sort of advisor in the Northwest. We've got quite a few people looking to increase storage capacity by lagoons and increasing sizes of towers, which is basically going to be directly affecting the scale. The water quality and the storage and things like that are really important, but the scale is going to be quite a big factor on what they're going to be affected by. How do we actually advise these farmers what's the best way to go forward? I've been advising sort of trying slatted sheds and keep them inside and things like that. A lot of people are looking at lagoons, but we've got the added disadvantage of lagoons now. The CSFO officers have said that buildings over lagoons are now not being looked at being sufficient to be windproof. So lagoons, because they're manually stirred and things like that, are going to be a problem to have an actual crust on. We also have a few people that are using sand now, which are the lagoons are not actually developing a crust on top, which is another adverse effect with the ammonia coming off them. But we've got all sorts of questions in there, but they're all sort of things that are all being asked by farmers, and I can't really address them. Is there any advice from anybody out there how to address them?
Paul, are you on the call? Paul Arnold?
Paul's not. Jonathan's here, though, so maybe...
All right, Jonathan.
Jonathan might be able to help, perhaps.
Are you there, Jonathan?
I have a feeling he might just be watching, not on the audio. Sorry.
One thing I will say is that the issue of slurry lagoons and air quality and planning permissions has come up, with the slurry investment scheme. So it is something that DEFRA is aware of, because it will create a problem, I think, when it comes to assessing air quality.
Yeah.
So we don't have any more on that at the moment. Like I say, they're just doing information gathering at this point in time.
Right.
For that scheme. Would you like us to come back to you with, we can get Jonathan or Paul to come back to you?
Any help would be greatly appreciated. There is an awful lot of farmers out there that are feeling as though, what way am I meant to be doing? You change one rule, you do this, that, and the next thing. But, I have quite a good understanding of trying to get an understanding of what's needed. But it's to try and guide these farmers in the right direction, and they just need some reassurance that they're going to invest this money and it's going to be worthwhile. In 2 years' time, if they've spent $250,000 on putting a roof over a lagoon and it doesn't work, or it's not up to scratch, it's a big investment just to basically be told that we've changed our ideas now, which is of a concern. The other problem we have with a lot of people with towers, whether it's the self-supporting ones or the roofs, is that because the gases are actually contained within, a lot of the towers are starting to fall apart basically in a very short space of time, because of obviously the gases in ammonia are quite corrosive. Do we know if there's any sort of preferred covers, or I know people are painting, some people are galvanising steel to try and keep it. Is there any good advice out there from anyone saying that this is a better one rather than others?
I can ask that question if no one else can answer it. What I was just going to say is that obviously if you're putting in a new slurry store, under the new slurry investment scheme, there'll be guidance for that at the time. I think the problem we've got at the moment is where the Clean Air Strategy is asking for farmers to cover their slurry stores, by a certain date. There is funding under countryside stewardship for existing lagoons, but we do also appreciate that there are some lagoons that are odd shapes, and might be difficult to cover. So you'd be looking at alternative options there, really, like using either chopped straw or the clay lacquer balls, or the hexaplates to reduce emissions. And the problem there is that they're very good at controlling the ammonia emissions, but obviously they're not good for preventing water ingress, rainwater, if you're in a high rainfall region. So, there is a possibility there for existing lagoons if you're not, proposing to replace it, under the new scheme.
So in summary, sorry to interrupt it. In summary, basically, any preventative form of is better than nothing.
Anything is better than nothing. But there have been some queries about putting, a shed, if you like, a cover over a lagoon, but that wouldn't control the ammonia emissions. That's good for stopping the water getting in.
Yeah.
But you'd still have to undertake some sort of measure on the slurry itself to reduce those emissions. Like the straw, the clay balls, to reduce the emissions, just to get a crust to form. Or, like I say, put the clay balls or the hexaplates on the top to control the emissions. Did you say about a slurry underneath a building?
Yeah, well, my own idea was that, anybody putting a new building up now should be looking at slats and a tank below the building rather than an independent lagoon on its own, really. Yeah,
it's certainly something that they seem to do in Northern Ireland, and in effect what you have then is, I suppose, one emission source, and if you have the non-return flaps on the slats, that keeps the ammonia, once it goes through, that keeps the ammonia from coming back up through into the shed. So that's a good mechanism of storing the slurry. And if there isn't a separate slurry storage, then you've just got the one emission source.
Yeah. Majority of farmers are shy of that purely for the fact of neighbours talking about possibly a contamination when they start to stir and killing animals when the emissions are coming out in amongst the cows. That's where the majority of people are reserved to put tanks below buildings. That seems to be what most people's horror stories are concerned about as far as that.
We can probably find some information actually from, like I say, they've done a lot of it in Northern Ireland, so there is information out there in the industry, and I'm sure there's some case studies, but we'll have to have a look and see if we can find that.
Well, that'd be great. As I say, I do quite a lot of these countryside stewardships, and most people are looking at trying to reduce water going into slurry and trying to become compliant by 2027. It is a big concern in the farming community.
Okay. So, is that okay?
Yeah, thank you very much for your help.
All right, thank you. Jonathan's put a comment in the chat that
yes.
He wasn't muted, but we still couldn't hear him. But he's happy to speak to the question. Yeah, he's provided contact details in the chat.
Okay, we'll do that. And there's a question from Nigel Penlington about covered yards, and SCAIL seems to work on animal numbers rather than surface area.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'd have to look.
Just one other thought with regard to, if you're putting in new housing, there are other mitigation options, and some of them are more expensive than others, but one consideration might be slurry cooling. So, you can extract the heat basically. If you cool the ammonia, you'll get less emissions, and then you can use the heat, for heating water or heating the shed. That's one form of mitigating the ammonia underneath your slats. Are there any more questions out there while Catherine looks up?
Yeah, I'm just having a look about the yard.
Colette, can you hear?
Yes.
Colette, hi, it's John Pinder here again. I was just interested in what we you were just saying about there are fewer emissions if you cool it and then use heat for whatever values back in buildings. Where there are these sort of good practices that will sort of reduce emissions, I'm sure a lot of them aren't actually quantified in terms of the percentage ammonia reduction. As we're sort of trying to sort of tally these things up and try to get things down to sort of 4%, although I accept that you didn't actually say that 4% is sacrosanct. But nevertheless, it would be useful to know what gives a big hit and significantly reduces ammonia reduction, and what sort of is only 1 or 2 percentage points improvement. And I guess these are sort of individual, but I can see there be quite a lot of initiatives that could be applied where it's actually going in the right direction, but you actually can't quantify the emission reduction. Have you got anything that to actually move me forward to answering those queries?
Well, at the moment, as Catherine suggested, we've just got it would be the latest inventory of ammonia emissions from UK agriculture, and that's probably not going to get updated for another couple of years now. So that's the latest information we have.
Yeah. Okay.
But what I would say is that as part of the proposals under the Clean Air Strategy with regard to best practice for housing, but also the dairy and beef permitting, there are ongoing consultations at the moment. Well, not consultations, but basically there are working groups that are looking at different aspects of beef and dairy cattle. So they're looking at nutrition, housing, slurry storage and spreading. And so they're trying to come up with a best practice document going forwards for beef and dairy, and they've commissioned some additional research where they've got gaps at the moment. So that is ongoing at the moment. So the best we've got at the moment is in that document I suggested, and then there'll be more coming forwards out of these consultations.
But that's just on beef and dairy, not poultry.
No, because poultry is more advanced anyway, and
yeah, for sure.
I think it's a question of just, like you said before, just getting the right, finding out what's included in the SCAIL background, what's included in that SCAIL emission factor, and what the suitable percentages are to apply on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. That's sort of my difficulty at the moment, but it's one to maybe even the first point is to actually come up with something and then share that to actually see how it stacks up. If I can't actually get any hard information, but that inventory of ammonia from UK agriculture is obviously going to be an important document to get to grips with.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for that.
Yeah, so I've had a look at the How Do You Mitigate for covering yard scale. Seems to work on animal numbers rather than surface area. It does work on livestock numbers. So we've got the emission factors based on. It's got some built-in mitigation around cleaning the yard and scraping and washing daily. not sure. Colette, do you know?
Well, when you change the numbers, does it change the calculation?
Yes. So it is based on livestock numbers I've looked. So it's not on yard area. It doesn't matter what yard area you put in. It calculates from the livestock numbers. So
Right, okay.
it must be based on an emissions factor based on livestock numbers.
Yeah, it's Nigel here. Thanks for that. It's sort of frustrating. I think there are one or two shortcomings of SCAIL when you start using it in anger.
Yeah, I suppose when it is supposed to be a simple tool, a screening tool. It may not cover everything, so there are limitations to it.
Yeah, I think the important thing is not to dwell too much on the detail. Put in as realistic a scenario as you can, and if you do adjust any figures or put in any user-defined emissions or a mitigation figure, then you need to justify what you've done and where you've got the figures from. You're just trying to create a realistic representation that gives us an indication of where the farm is, again with that additional information about what's going on the farm, and it's just trying to put that information into context with the site condition to enable us to make that that judgment. So it's looking at all the information available. So it's not designed to be 100% accurate. If you wanted that, you'd be doing a detailed modelling. But you don't want to go down that route unless you've got high levels of exceedance that you can't mitigate. And again, if you think if the result's not going to come out in your favour, you probably wouldn't even do it then. You'd probably be just changing what you're doing instead.
From experience, modelling can get you, things that might not look very good on SCAIL can really change when you do modelling. Because of the extra scope. But just a question on yards came up because through CSFO and mid-tier, there's a lot of options effort put into covering yards to reduce slurry volumes, dirty water, etc. But then when you're wanting to put the slurry store in, you're needing to mitigate against the slurry store, as was mentioned earlier, really. So you're needing those to try and balance up the new slurry store, which the farmer needs to try and comply with the regulations, the NVZs or whatever. Or farming rules for water now, which on some farms means more than 5 months.
I think are we talking about covering, are you talking about covering dirty yards and the emissions from them? Yeah. I think, looking at it from a pragmatic perspective, it's something that would have existed previously, so it'll be sitting in the background levels on APIS, and the fact that you're covering it is definitely going to have a positive impact on your slurry store, because you're not getting that extra, dirty water going into the slurry store. So it is a benefit, to water runoff. But, the emissions would already have been in the background since, for as long as the farm had been there, that yard had been there.
Yeah, but they may well reduce with the covering because you've not got the constant blowing, especially if the shed's reasonably enclosed.
Exactly,
and emissions are related to surface area.
Yes. Yeah, certainly. If it's if you've got say walls either side of your your roof, if you've got a mechanism of controlling the airflow coming over that surface area, it will reduce emissions definitely.
So we don't have an emission factor for yards, I think is the real shortcoming. Because that would really encourage people to reduce yard areas.
I mean, it is in SCAIL, and obviously keeping the yard clean is the key thing, really. That's removing the slurry. before the air can, take the ammonia away, the airflow.
Yeah, and that's
so it's keeping the yard clean.
Built into SCAIL. Yeah,
that would be really useful when we've got slats in mid-tier. Because with slats we might be able to knock out huge amounts of yard area because we're not pushing slowly around the countryside. And we'd like to justify those in the mid-tier application. Maybe Jonathan could comment on that. Or we can go offline and have a chat about it.
Did you pick up his number there on the chat facility? Jonathan Skidmore?
Yeah, I've got Jonathan's number, thank you.
Yeah. If you talk to Jonathan, and I'm sure he'll have a discussion with you about that.
Any more questions? I think we've
gone over by 20 minutes.
Yeah.
If I just move on and tell you that what we plan to do is we will email you the accompanying notes for future reference. So what we have is essentially a document that provides a bit more detail about what we covered on Thursday and today, a little bit more guidance about how you can use SCAIL. And we'll also circulate a summary of the questions and answers from both webinars. And a survey. We'd like you to let us know, what you liked about it, what you didn't like about it, what we could have added or taken away, what would be more helpful to you. And we will be posting the recordings of these events on YouTube, so we'll send you the link for those as well. There's also a document called Clearing the Air that was produced by the EA in the Northwest in tandem with ourselves, Catchment Sensitive Farming, and the Eden Rivers Trust. And it's a document that you can freely circulate to your farmers, anyone that's interested in knowing about ammonia and, how it can be mitigated. So feel free to use that one. And we have applied for basis points for these events, and I'm waiting to hear back from them. But as soon as we have that confirmation, we will let you know. There's some useful links there, and there's some more useful links also in the guidance document. So I hope that's been helpful to you. I'd just like to thank you all for attending. We've had a good turnout. I hope it's been useful to you. And thank you to the Eden Rivers Trust for giving us some interesting presentations, particularly for Alistair Brock, who gave us an interesting perspective on the impact of nitrogen on bogs, and to all my Catchment Sensitive Farming colleagues who helped to deliver the presentation. So I think we can close the presentation now.
Thank you, Colette.